This is a comically impressive battleship. It was built by the US and remains the largest battleship ever built in recorded history. Also one of the top battleships. What is a battleship? Put simply, it's a floating mobile artillery on water. Therefore, a battleship's tonnage is closely tied to the caliber of its guns. Take the Iowa-class battleship with a displacement of 57,540 tons, a length of 270.5 meters, width of 33 meters, and a draft of 11 meters. As for weapons, take the World War II-era USS Missouri for example. It carried 9 Mark 7 naval guns, housed in 3 triple-gun turrets, 2 in the front and 1 in the rear. Gun caliber, 16 inches, with a range of up to 39 kilometers. Additionally, there were 20 Mark 12 guns, mounted in 10 Mark 28 turrets, with a caliber of 5 inches, used for close-range defense and anti-air. Also 20 quad-mounted 1.6-inch AA guns, and 49 0.8-inch anti-aircraft machine guns. Worth mentioning, on both sides of the ship were 2 catapults that could launch 3 float planes for reconnaissance missions. As for armor, the main hull armor was 30.7 centimeters thick. Main gun turret armor ranged from 18.4 to 40.3 centimeters. Command tower armor ranged from 18.4 to 40.4 centimeters. Deck armor ranged from 15.3 to 17.9 centimeters, with a total armor weight of 18,446 tons. In terms of power, the hydraulic system was incredibly powerful. Equipped with 8 boilers, and for steam turbines, generating over 112,000 horsepower. With such a setup, the Iowa-class battleship could reach speeds of over 33 knots. That's incredibly fast. Even by today's standards, the top carriers of the UK and France can only do around 27 knots. Fast, tough, and powerful. No wonder the Iowa class could dominate its foreign counterparts. It hit hard and fast. No surprise it became a legend, the only battleship to truly rule the seas. Let's drop some lead on this motherfucker. But with the advancement of modern naval warfare, today, battleships have been fully retired. Yet this queen of the seas, the steel monster ruled by caliber, remains the perfect symbol of naval warfare for many. Welcome to Crease Military Base, where we explore global military equipment. Today we'll talk about the Sea Beast, the Iowa-class battleship. During World War I, battleships were the star players. In that pre-aircraft carrier era, the top naval units of all nations were battleships, without question. The bigger the ship, the thicker the gun barrel. After WWII, to reduce military spending, the US, UK, Japan, France, and Italy, 5 countries in total, signed the Washington Naval Treaty in 1922, limiting naval armaments. Battleships were restricted to a displacement of under 35,000 tons and gun calibers no larger than 16 inches. After the treaty was signed, from the early 1920s to mid-1930s, the US didn't build any new battleships, marking a relatively quiet period. But as Japan rose in the Asia-Pacific region, the US began considering development of their next-generation battleships. However, due to the restrictions of the Washington and London naval treaties, the US couldn't build freely. They had to make the most capable ship within the allowed tonnage. The North Carolina-class battleship was a product of that compromise, with a standard displacement of 36,600 tons. It carried 9 16-inch guns and could reach a top speed of 28 knots. It was basically the most powerful battleship that could be built within that tonnage range. But surprisingly, not long after, the North Carolina-class was proposed. Before construction even began, the Japanese suddenly dropped out. In January 1936, Japan announced its withdrawal from the London Naval Treaty. Italy soon followed. In this context, Britain, the US, and France added a supplementary clause to the treaty. It stated that By March 1937, if Japan and Italy still refused to rejoin, then restrictions on warship sizes would be relaxed to a standard displacement of 45,000 tons. It was clear that Japan was focused on expanding its imperial strategy and had no intention of renewing the treaty. As time went on, Japan's influence in the Asia-Pacific region kept growing. Rumors began to spread about Japan building new battleships. In fact, Japan had already started planning large battleships as early as 1934 and began construction in November 1937. Of course, the Americans at the time had no idea Japan was secretly preparing something big. Their main concern was Japan's Kongo-class battlecruisers. These ships had a displacement of 27,000 tons and were equipped with the twin 350 6mm gun turrets. They sounded unremarkable, but their biggest advantage was speed. They could reach speeds of 30.5 knots, faster than any active U.S. battleship at the time. In the event of war, the long American supply and communication lines would be vulnerable to these fast raiders. Under this dual pressure, the U.S. Navy began designing a new battleship with strong firepower, large displacement, and high speed. The result was the Iowa-class battleship. The first Iowa-class ship began construction in June 1940, was completed in August 1942, and entered service in February 1943. The other three sister ships also entered service by July 1944. That covers their origin. Next, let's talk about the service history of the Iowa class. Logically speaking, a powerful ship like the Iowa class, once deployed, could potentially change the course of a war. Unfortunately, it arrived too late. By the time the Iowa entered service, the battles of Midway and Guadalcanal had already happened. At that point, aircraft carriers had become the main focus of the Pacific War. Battleships went from frontline stars to bodyguards of carrier fleets. Moreover, after two major defeats, Japan switched from offense to defense. So on the Pacific front, the Iowa didn't get many chances to shine. It never even faced off with Japanese battleships directly. Most of its combat experience was in air defense and shore bombardment. For example, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, it escorted U.S. carriers. In the Battle of Iwo Jima, it shelled Japanese positions. It also bombarded Okinawa, the Japanese mainland, and carried out other offensive operations. Although the Iowa never engaged in a true battleship duel during World War II, there were still a few moments when real challenges could have emerged. On August 27, 1943, the lead ship Iowa departed for waters off eastern Canada. According to Navy intelligence reports, Germany's second Bismarck-class battleship, the Tirpitz, might enter the North Atlantic. So the Iowa was dispatched to intercept it. The Tirpitz was the largest battleship in Europe, with a full load displacement of 52,600 tons and armed with 8 380mm guns. Its combat power was formidable. However, compared to the Iowa, the T2 class battleships were inferior in weapon range, speed, and design philosophy. There was no real battlefield comparison or direct data confrontation. If these two battleships had ever engaged directly, it is foreseeable that it would have been a showdown worthy of the history books. Unfortunately, such a scene never played out. After searching for the U-boat in the North Atlantic, the Iowa returned to the U.S. on October 25, 1934, and a few days later, it received its most important mission, crossing the Atlantic to transport U.S. President Roosevelt to North Africa to meet with other Allied leaders. Notably, on this voyage, a thrilling and dangerous incident occurred that nearly cost the U.S. President his life at sea. The central figure was the destroyer USS William D. Porter, part of the Iowa's escort screen. During a routine exercise, a sailor on the destroyer forgot to remove the torpedo's detonator, resulting in a live torpedo being fired at the Iowa. In the following 5 minutes, chaos erupted. Every sailor on board was running around, shouting conflicting orders, desperately trying to warn the Iowa of the impending danger. Eventually, they had to break radio silence to tell the Iowa to make an emergency right turn. Fortunately, the torpedo detonated early, causing no damage. However, at the same time, to guard against a potential assassination attempt, all of the Iowa's guns were turned. and aimed directly at the porter, ready to fire at any moment. After the incident, every crew member aboard the porter, including the captain, was sent to Bermuda for trial. This marked the first time in U.S. Navy history that an entire ship's crew was arrested. When the porter docked in Bermuda, it was surrounded by Marines. The entire crew was detained for several days to investigate what had happened. The final investigation concluded that it was a complete accident. After President Roosevelt ordered the release of everyone involved, the matter was laid to rest. Back to the Iowa. After successfully completing the presidential escort mission, she was deployed to the Pacific Theater in January 1944 to fight against Japan. In October 1944, the Iowa went to the Philippines to support MacArthur's landing operation. During this time, Gisaburo Ozawa used the remaining Japanese aircraft carriers as bait to lure the Iowa into pursuit, easing the pressure on the Philippines' defense. The Iowa, along with other ships of the U.S. 38th Task Force, joined the chase. This decision caused her to miss what might have been her best chance to face the Yamato. The battleship Yamato, the largest battleship in human history, had a full load displacement of 72,810 tons and was armed with 9 460mm naval guns with a total gun weight of 22,895 tons. Aside from speed, in all other respects, the Yamato was superior to the Iowa. So if the two ships had met in clear weather, the Yamato would likely have had the upper hand, but the Iowa had its own unique advantages, namely, its advanced electronics. The Iowa was equipped with the most advanced radar and fire control systems of World War II. This gave it excellent combat capability at night and in poor weather conditions. So, if these two battleships had really faced off, who would win? A lot would depend on the weather. Sadly, in real life, this epic showdown never happened. During World War II, the Iowa never faced a true challenge. The war had barely started when it was already drawing to a close. On August 29, 1945, the USS Iowa and USS Missouri entered Tokyo Bay side by side as occupying forces. 5 days later, on September 2nd, Japanese representatives signed the Instrument of Unconditional Surrender aboard the USS Missouri, marking the formal end of World War II. Excited sailors packed every inch of the Missouri they could stand on, surrounding the signing table from all angles, just to witness this historic moment. Oh, that's right to be. Beyond the story of the world, that God will be turned away. Number 2. After World War II ended, the Iowa-class battleships lost their purpose. The lead ship Iowa, second ship New Jersey, and fourth ship Wisconsin were placed in reserve. Relegated to the sidelines, only Missouri remained symbolically in service. Until the Korean War broke out, all 4 Iowa-class ships returned to active duty to provide naval bombardment against North Korean targets. After the Korean War ended, the 4 Iowa-class ships were again put into reserve, collecting dust at port. Until the Vietnam War broke out, the U.S. Navy realized they once again lacked affordable and effective combat weapons. So, the Iowa-class ships, specifically the New Jersey, were modernized and returned to service. In September 1968, she headed to Vietnam to provide fire support for the U.S. Army. But this stint didn't last long either. By April 1969, her deployment ended and she was decommissioned again. She remained inactive for over a decade. After Reagan took office in 1981, he promised to strengthen the U.S. military to counter the Soviet Union's growing military power. At the time, the Soviet Kirov-class missile cruiser had just entered service. It was the largest surface combatant built since World War II. To counter the Kirov class, the U.S. Navy recommissioned all 4 Iowa-class battleships. They underwent large-scale modernization to suit new combat roles. The upgrades cost a total of $1.7 billion. Each ship was comprehensively upgraded with electronic systems and fitted with CIWS defense systems, Tomahawk cruise missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and Stinger surface-to-air missile launchers. These upgrades gave the Iowa-class ships new life and returned them to active service. However, these battleships were ultimately products of the 1930s. No matter how much they were upgraded, they could never fully meet the needs of modern warfare. After Reagan left office in 1990, U.S. defense spending was cut. The Iowa and New Jersey were decommissioned again and mothballed in November that same year. Their sister ships, Missouri and Wisconsin, were sent to the Middle East for their final battle. In the 1991 Gulf War, to combat Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the U.S. launched Operation Desert Storm. The U.S. Navy deployed 6 carrier battle groups, including 2 World War II veterans, the USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin. On January 17, 1991, the Missouri launched the first Tomahawk missile against Iraqi ground targets. In the following 5 days, she fired 27 more missiles. After the Tomahawks ran out, Missouri approached the occupied Kuwaiti coastline. Once targets were in range of her main guns, she fired 112 main gun shells over 3 days, flattening Iraqi defenses. Wisconsin then joined in to continue shelling the coastline. During this time, both battleships also coordinated a deception operation against Failaka Island near Kuwait, making Iraqi forces believe the U.S. was planning a landing, causing them to divert their troops and scatter their forces. Meanwhile, coalition ground forces set out from Saudi Arabia, crossed the desert, and flanked the Iraqis from the side. This world-renowned military operation lasted over 40 days. Iraq was completely defeated. The 2 battleships fired over 1,100 406mm shells in total, as well as 50 Tomahawk cruise missiles. According to the U.S. military's post-war cost analysis, the AC-130 gunships of the U.S. Air Force and the naval bombardment from the Iowa-class battleships of the U.S. Navy were the most cost-effective weapons in the operation. They delivered the largest destructive impact for the lowest economic cost. Truly the kings of cost performance. After the Gulf War ended, the Soviet Union also collapsed. U.S. military budgets were drastically cut. The high cost of maintaining and operating battleships became unsustainable. The Iowa-class battleships officially entered retirement to honor the long service and glorious combat history of these ships. None of the 4 Iowa-class battleships were scrapped. Instead, they were transformed into floating maritime museums. They are now spread across the United States for public viewing. All in all, as battleships, the Iowa-class ships had a long service history, from World War II to the Cold War and into modern warfare. They witnessed the transformation of naval combat. In modern warfare, there's clearly no place for battleships, but if there's one weapon that best represents raw power, that best showcases the charm of armor, and best embodies the philosophy of firepower above all, then it has to be the battleship. And the Iowa class is undoubtedly the epitome of that legacy. Alright then, that's all for this episode. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which military gear you'd like to see next, and I'll make it happen. See you in the next video.